Is it too early to start wondering aloud if maybe Joe Douglas was right to let Bryce Huff walk out the door? I'm Glenn Norton with Jet Nation Radio and JetNation.com. Be sure to log into JetNation.com where you can register and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. So, took a look at the Eagles box score today, and for the third week in a row, Bryce Huff, well, I guess week one he had a tackle, but since then his name has not appeared on the stat sheet. No sacks, no half sacks, no tackles for loss, nothing. Absolutely nothing from Bryce Huff in Philly. As you can imagine, how we doing, Charles? Good to see you. As you can imagine, fans in Philly are going absolutely bonkers. The Philadelphia Eagles paid Bryce Huff for this season $17 million. And look, folks, it's 3 games. All right. I don't want to, and I'm going to explain why this isn't an overreaction. I think it's a fair question at this point. I'm not writing Bryce Huff off. I'm not saying he isn't going to have himself a, bounce back in the next few weeks and have a really nice season. But looking at his history and looking not just at what he's done this year, if you look at Huff, he's a guy, we all know undrafted free agent out of Memphis and all that stuff. Had himself a 10 sack season last year. But as a rookie, as you would expect, a developmental guy you're bringing along, as a rookie, 2 sacks. Okay. Year 2, 2 sacks. Year 3, 3.5 sacks. Year 4, 10 sacks. All right. Looks like Bryce Huff has arrived. And here's the thing with Bryce Huff, I said, I think going into year 2, 2 years ago before he had the 10 sacks, when we do our bold prediction show, I think mine was that Huff would have 7+ sacks. And he had 3, and I was wrong. But you could see it. You were expecting it to happen because of the fact that we saw so many plays. We all saw the numbers, quickest time off the ball, getting to the quarterback. And I apologize today. I have a cold. I may have to pause out a couple times. But so when Bryce Huff had his 10 sack season, it wasn't like out of nowhere, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. It was, okay, that's what we were expecting. We were waiting on a year like that because a guy with a get-off that's at one point, I believe his get-off was quicker than Myles Garrett, right? So why wouldn't you expect for him to eventually break out? And he did break out last year. 10 sacks. And then he hits free agent. Now, listen, Joe Douglas, this, while on the one hand, I'm saying with Joe Douglas right to let him walk, let's not let Joe Douglas off the hook completely. Before it got to that point, he could have traded him. There could have been a deal made, right? Where Bryce Huff could have been dealt so much. Jets were out of the playoff hunt. There had to be a team somewhere that would have given something up for his services. And Joe Douglas didn't make that happen. So, yeah, he did lose him for nothing. I'm not completely absolving Joe Douglas of any level of failure here for not getting something in return for an asset. However, once the free agent process begins and the asking price gets up to 14, 15, 16, 17 million, whatever it may be in cash. And by the way, I've addressed this before, and I had someone say it again the other day. When I talk about things like Bryce Huff getting 17 million to not be productive, and I can't believe I even have to explain this because the thought wouldn't even enter my mind. But someone said to me the other day, as they always do when money comes up, why do you care about the owner's money? I don't. But do you know who I think does? The owner. So if I'm the owner and my GM and coach and coordinator came to me and said, you know what, boss, we think this guy, he's worth writing a check for 17 million. Okay. Even if I am a billionaire, 17 million, that's enough for me to say, why does this guy have 1 tackle in 3 weeks? And why is he playing fewer snaps now than he did with the team we got him from? right? Because that was part of the story. He was going to go to Philly, increased reps, full-time player, and massive production. As it turns out, decreased reps, zero production for 17 million. I don't care about the owner's money. I don't care if he gave Bryce Huff $1 trillion, but it's the owner's money. And if they gave him that much money, you don't think there were some expectations that came along with that? So when I talk, and again, I can't believe I have to explain this. It's almost like people just want sort of a straw man. Like they don't like what you're saying, so they accuse you of something stupid. Like, oh, you're worried about Woody's money. You're worried about Jeffrey Loria's money. No, I'm not. I don't give a damn. I don't care. But I think they care about their money. So when they write a check for 17 million, they want something for that. So Joe Douglas lets him walk. And again, as you would expect, Philly sports fans are livid at the lack of production from Bryce Huff. And I did remember that last year, some of his production came against backup tackles, right? 10 sacks. And I thought it was a few. I thought like 3, maybe 4 against backup tackles. Luckily, let me give this account, excuse me, credit at Philly_Nation, Philly Nation on Twitter. Whoever runs that account took the time to go back and look at all of Bryce Huff's sacks and break them down. So Bryce Huff, again, 7 career sacks over 3 years before a breakout year with 10 sacks last year. Here's what Philly Nation found, and this is the whole tweet. Wanted to look into Bryce Huff since I'm not doing anything tonight. 6 of Bryce Huff's 10 sacks in 2023 came against backup tackles. 2 other sacks came from Tua falling to the ground and Huff presumably touching him down while Huff was being blocked by a tight end. And another came on a Justin Herbert rollout where Huff was unblocked. So you got an unblocked, and listen, a sack's a sack. Still got to get there. Still got to wrap him up. I get that. But as we've said with Will McDonald recently, right? He's got these 5 sacks. It's great at showing production. But a couple of them are like, all right, you didn't exactly line up and beat the man across from you. A couple of these, there was a little bit of luck involved. Again, which it's not knocking it. It's just saying just because a guy has X amount of sacks doesn't mean he lined up and beat up the guy across from him that many times. Doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes your sacks are a little bit more, a little less work involved. So that's what we got. 10 sacks for Huff, 6 against backups. Another against a tight end and a quarterback who fell down, and another one completely unblocked. Which means, and actually he has it at the bottom here. He beat Malata, Slater, and McGlickney for 2.5 sacks collectively. So there's that number again, right? 2 in year 1, 3 in year 2, 3 in year 3, or whatever, 2, 2, 3, whatever it was. Let me look it up here so I'm right. Yeah, 2 in year 1, 2 in year 2, 3.5 in year 3, 10 in year 4. But it turns out only 2.5 of them were, beat the guy across from you, get to the quarterback. Again, sorry, beat the starter across from you. And again, this isn't Bryce Huff's fault. If the Eagles offered Bryce Huff back to the Jets tomorrow, I would take him. I think I know he was a much better player with the Jets than he has been for Philly. But Howie Roseman is one of the best GMs in the NFL. Vic Fangio is one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL. And they can't find a way to get him to make a play. They're not playing him. His snap counts, I looked him up earlier. Let me see if I still have him up here. I do not, so just take my word for it. Bryce Huff's snap counts right now are lower in Philly than they were with the Jets. The whole point of him going there was, I'm going to get a pay raise and I'm going to get increased playing time. And that's just not happening. So maybe Joe Douglas and the Jets looked at Bryce and said, look, he's disruptive, right? Disruptive, but not productive. We feel like he's a guy who will get us 3 to 5 sacks. Maybe last year, maybe they viewed that as an aberration. Like, hey, we're glad he got us those 10, but we don't feel like that's a true 10. The repeatability of that, the chances of him getting to face another 5 or 6 backup tackles the likelihood of that is very slim. So can he be an effective player, a quality player? Absolutely. Is he a $17 million player? Absolutely not. So we'll see as this plays out, as the season plays out, um, whether or not Douglas got it right. I mean, I would be shocked if Howie Roseman, again, one of the better GMs in the NFL, if he handed out $17 million to a pass rusher who, in his system, with a highly respected defensive coordinator, look what they did to the Saints today. The Saints scored 1,000,000 points each of the first 2 weeks. And then what they put up today, they scored a touchdown late to what, 13 or 15, whatever it was. They got completely stonewalled by this Eagles defense. But I'm looking at it, and again, I know it's only 3 weeks, but it's not that Bryce Huff has been bad or ineffective. He's been invisible. He has been a complete non-factor. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I've watched every Philly game. But after each game, I've gone back and watched their highlights. And, you get to see 20, 30 plays. I haven't seen Bryce Huff at all. There may be times he's on the field. He's not doing anything that would make you notice him. And when I have spotted him early in a play and focused on him, no push, no pressure. I'm not here to say he's not working hard because, maybe he got paid and he's mailing it in. Without knowing that, without having any evidence of that, how am I going to, I'm not going to go out and say I know that to be the case. But I do know, believe me, as a Jets fans, I know the second a guy gets paid, and he's not an all-pro, oh, that's it. He's not trying anymore. I've seen people say it about JFM, about Quinnen Williams. I mean, with Mo Wilkerson, it was true. That was obvious. But you look at a guy like JFM, people for years said he's not trying anymore. You think NFL D linemen get 50 pressures without trying? You think you just show up to work and just kind of lean forward when the ball is snapped and you get in the quarterback's face? It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. Carmelo says a lot of fans don't give JD enough credit. He learned from one of the best in Ozzie Newsome. Absolutely. I think we're going to get to a point where the JD haters are going to have to stop for lack of, I mean, some of them won't. Some people are incessant. They'll find fault in everything. Oh, but he missed on Zach. Right. Like, as I've said a billion times on this show and others, every GM misses. Tell me about the hits. Tell me where the hits are with your general manager. Because with Joe Douglas, there's a lot of blue chip talent on this roster. A lot. Like, way more elite young talent on this roster than most teams have, as far as I'm concerned. Was it 12 stack? Thanks. I literally, it was great today. Jets weren't playing, no stress. Literally had 4 laptops set up. I didn't need red zone. I had 4 different games going, so I could see as much of each game as I wanted. But that meant losing track of a few things. Like, people would ask me, how'd this guy do today? How'd that team look? Like, I saw them in bits and pieces. That Saints game, honestly, Stack, I kind of tuned out of that Saints game for a while because I had the over. So when it was 3-0 at halftime or whatever it was, I was like, God, I was still watching it out of the corner of my eye. I saw some of the good throws down the stretch. This cold killer. But this Rams come back and beat the Niners. Niners fall to 1-2. And you know what that got me thinking? Excuse me. Excuse me. Well, that got me thinking, whole damn house is sick. I talked about, week 1, like, good measuring stick and barometer and all that. I get it. But I wish the Jets had played them week 5 or 6. Like, I wanted to see the Jets when they sort of were closer to firing on all cylinders than it being their first game. I'm not convinced now that if the Jets played the Niners this week instead of the Pats, or next week instead of the Broncos, Aaron Rodgers already looks like a different quarterback than he did in that game. It was so obvious. It was so clear in that game that he was, and I've talked about this. He was a little bit limpy. His mobility was severely restricted. They were clearly calling plays, and I said during the game, I said it feels like Rodgers isn't audibling out of any of this stuff. And I think what happened was, and this is me guessing, but I think Rodgers and Hackett decided, hey man, my first game back off this Achilles, let's take it easy. Let's not test it. I'm not running. I'm not evading pressure. Let's do quick tosses, quick screens, and a couple of shots down the field. That's it. And that's what they did. And it made them a little bit predictable. It made the offense, it restricted a little bit more of what they could do by him just staying in the pocket the whole time. And then you watch him against the Pats a few days ago, and you're like, different guy. They literally have a different quarterback now than they had 12 days ago because this guy's moving and running and rolling and throwing on the go. Completely different player, makes it a completely different offense. So I would love to see this team now against the 49ers versus Rodgers week one being a statue. I made that point after the game, and I actually heard a quote from Bill Belichick the other day, which I really liked because it kind of goes along the lines. I get frustrated when people talk about, this is an excuse, that's an excuse. Like, oh, team lost for this reason. Oh, it's an excuse. No, it's a reason. Like, if you're missing your best players or your starting quarterback, like, yeah, you lost the game, but that was a huge factor. Like, let's not dismiss it and say that everyone had their guys. Everyone gets injuries, right? Sometimes the other team's third string linebacker is hurt and your first string quarterback is hurt. Those aren't the same thing. So Belichick said the other day on a show I was watching, he said, excuse me, he said, in this league, it's not about who you play, it's about when you play them. And I thought that was perfectly said because how many times do you see a situation where you have to play a team and sometimes it works to your advantage. Sometimes you get the backup quarterback, right? But you get mad when you get the starter, and then a week later that guy gets hurt, and the week after that they play the Pats, and they beat you with the starter, and the Pats beat the backup, and you're like, damn it, were the Pats really the better team in terms of the head-to-head matchup, like the way you played them versus the way they played them? Well, they got to take it easy because the backup was playing. Speaking of backups, uh, congratulations to the Dolphins today, getting an opportunity to look at what's his name, Fail Mary. You know who I'm talking. Tim Boyle. Yeah, Sky. Here's a question for you, Jets fans. I'm watching that game, and I'm thinking to myself, and I tweeted this out. How is it that Mike McDaniel's viewed as this offensive genius, which he is, right? I've never heard anyone say anything other than that. Like highly respected offensive genius. How does an excuse me? How does an offensive genius end up with Tim Boyle on his roster? And I'm not trying to be funny. It's mystifying. I get how Robert Saleh ends up with Tim Boyle because Tim Boyle is friends with Aaron Rodgers and he knows the offense and you don't have a backup. Okay, that makes sense. But when you're an offensive genius and you end up with Tim Boyle on your roster behind Skylar Thompson, like, did you watch Skylar Thompson and come away thinking, oh, he's better than Mike White? No, not a chance. Not a chance. So real quick, pop in the chat here. Mike says Joe Douglas seems to be the best GM we've had in years. I do not disagree. I think the talent on this roster speaks for itself. And anyone who thinks this isn't one of the most talented rosters the Jets have ever had, you haven't been around long enough. Question is fair, but I think it's more of a scheme thing. With the Jets, I think it's still been really good. That's from a land that, listen, he would definitely be better than what he has been in Philly. He would be having some impact if he were still a Jet, but would he be a 10 sack guy again? Perhaps, but I don't. And again, I mentioned that to someone the other day who was knocking him. I said, look, new team, new coach, new scheme, new everything. Which look, these are all factors. It's not, like I said, it's not the lack of production that would be alarming to me if I was an Eagles fan. It's the lack of even feeling like he's on the field. I mean, he really is just invisible. Um, Dan says, I had no issue letting Huff go, bringing Reddick here when you have to pay Gardner, Wilson, and Vera Tucker. Hall, that made sense. So the GM compounded a problem with yeah, the Reddick thing. Kind of tired of talking about it, and I think, well, I could be wrong, but I think with the Jets trading for Reddick and saying they would work on a deal in season, maybe they wouldn't have. Maybe they would have, get in here, play, then we'll talk about a deal. But then you just hope he plays to his peak and you win a Super Bowl and then you let him walk because you're not paying. And of course, at the time, you didn't know about JJ, right? And we don't know if JJ would have asked for a new deal, but he would have been able to, having completed his third year. So you'd be looking at Sauce, Garrett, Brees, JJ, Reddick. And Michael Carter wasn't signed at that point yet. All those guys at the same time, I don't see how you would have made it work. Um, he set up this team to go through the draft, and now not needing immediate help through the draft. Pointing question, Olufashanu. Pointing question? I'm not sure what you mean. That's from Mike. Yeah, listen, the drafts have been the last 2 years. I'll be honest. I haven't loved the approach. A lot of I feel like there were a lot of spots where they could have taken guys who would be more immediate contributors, but the guys he's brought in, prior to that, especially now, as we see Sherwood emerge as a guy, who can be a starter for you if you need him to. Um, Eccles has been a really nice backup. So you've got that class is looking a little bit better. Michael Clemens, not playing great, um, but contributor. I mean, they're starting him. I don't think he would start on most teams, but he's a regular contributor now, who isn't the superstar, but he's solid enough player. As I say all the time, like you can't expect everyone to be a superstar, and you can't say everyone who isn't a superstar sucks. So every team is going to have, I don't care if you're the Super Bowl champs, anywhere from the best team in the NFL to the worst team in the NFL. You're going to have a handful of guys who are just okay, who are replaceable in the upcoming offseason. But that's fine. Are they on the roster? Are they contributing? Right now, Michael Clemens is. Of course, Max Mitchell isn't. But you look at the draft the year prior to that, AVT's healthy now, playing well, playing really well. Michael Carter, who I just mentioned, one of the best nickels in the NFL. Jamie and Sherwood, starting caliber backer. That's going to be an interesting question. We've talked about that. What do you do if he keeps playing the way he is and Mosley misses some more time? But again, Eccles, nice backup. So there's a lot of guys on this roster who have come in. Joe Tippmann, the more recent pick, is he the next? Is he the next Joe Douglas draft pick who enters that echelon of like top 3, top 5 in his position in the NFL? He's off to a really good start this year. So, and then now we get to see Olu this week. I'm not thrilled about him making his debut at right tackle. Obviously not the position he played in college. Having played one preseason game there doesn't make me feel a whole lot better. And it's not as if he looked like Anthony Munoz in that one game in the preseason where he played right tackle. So there will be some concerns, but let's see him come out and play well. Part of the benefit to having Aaron Rodgers is you don't need a tackle to be elite. Just if the receivers can do their thing, Rodgers is going to get the ball out quickly enough to help the tackle, to help the whole O line in not allowing pressures and sacks and and hits on the quarterback. Let's see. Rich says 99 has 4 sacks this year. Isn't it 5? I think it's 5, Rich. He had 2 against the Pats. He had 3 the previous week. But yeah, Will McDonald is doing a really nice job. Broncos won today. Listen, these next 2 games already a lot tougher than anybody anticipated when the schedule came out. And somebody said to me earlier, and it's so true. Even when I can't even remember if we did a schedule release. I don't think we do a record prediction show. If we do it, that's how great my memory is. It's like sort of, yeah, sure, just because. But it is so silly. You have no, again, what the Belichick quote. It's not who you play, it's when you play him. How the hell am I going to sit here now and say, yeah, let's talk about this game that's going to happen 4 months from now when we have no idea who the players are going to be? Injuries, trades, things like that. So my point being, though, I watched that Denver game today, especially early on. Bo Nix looked fantastic. Watched a lot of the Minnesota game. Sam Darnold looked fantastic. I think it might be some of the best throws I've ever seen Sam Darnold make. And he looked confident. His team's got his back. He didn't have Addison. He didn't have Hawkinson. I'm not sure when these guys are due back, but two of his biggest weapons weren't present, and he was dealing. So happy to see him playing well, but I hope he stinks it up in London. But yeah, Brian's asking, what do I think of Darnold's progress? I think it's very impressive, and this is obviously the best situation he's ever played in. There's Dan Orlovsky retweeted a clip of himself from the offseason, preseason saying, best situation Darnold's been in. This is his shot. Worked on some things in San Fran last year. I think he specified, getting his lower body in alignment. And he said, I think Darnold can lead this team to the playoffs. That's what they're looking like right now. Let's see. Please don't let Tepper poach JD. Yeah, I don't see that. The Jets, I think, the Jets stay healthy. They're going to the playoffs. Joe Douglas is getting an extension. That's all there is to it. Mike says Darnold needed a fresh start. Absolutely. Look, he went to Carolina where it was apparently not a whole lot better. And I'm talking about, you had Teddy Bridgewater come out and say that the Matt Rule didn't work on red zone in practice, like just disorganized, not an NFL level program. So can you really blame Darnold for that? But we'll see how that keeps going. And excuse me, it's terrible. We already talked about these 12 points. Yeah, Dolphins and Pats, 6 points total. Not a great week for those two teams, but it's a long season. Jets got to keep doing what they're doing. Got to keep getting better. We've seen people say it, and they're right. We got to see if Rodgers and Garrett Wilson can get on the same page, because I think there were probably more off-target throws to Garrett. I mean, because Garrett's getting the most targets. But there were at least 3 or 4 balls that they clearly weren't. They weren't clicking. They weren't firing on all cylinders. But they'll get there. They'll get there eventually. Worth noting, Devontae Adams looked pretty unhappy as Oakland was getting stomped by the Red Rifle. Andy Dalton comes in. And of course, Andy Dalton comes in. What did he do? All he does is become the first quarterback in the NFL this year to throw for, excuse me, brutal, to throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. So good job for him. There's a few teams around the league where it feels like teams are starting young kids to get a look at them, but the backup would be the better option if they wanted to win some football games. That Carolina situation is crazy. I don't know what Tepper's doing. He's like the modern day George Steinbrenner. Hires a new head coach every 8 to 12 months. So we'll see what happens with the guys they have in place now. But that'll wrap this one up. Bryce Huff, another shutout on the stat sheet. And again, not ripping him. Good character, hard worker, rooted hard for him out of Memphis. But maybe Joe Douglas was right to say no thanks when the bidding got up into the price range that it did. Have a good one, Jets.